The next item is a request to approve to direct the treasurer and chief counsel to submit declaratory ruling requests to the Oneida Judiciary by July 15th regarding the Chairwoman Tina Danforth's opinion that the June 13 General Tribal Council meeting per capita motion and amendments had irregularities and needed further discussion by the General Tribal Council. This is questions, comments? Joanne, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, when this matter was brought forward, I began doing the research in regards to prior Oneida Appeals Commission actions, which are applicable under the judiciary law. There were two prior actions. Excuse me. The first occurred in 2000, Ed Delgado versus the Oneida Business Committee, and in that ruling, the Oneida Appeals Commission stated that it is not in a position to respond to declaratory rulings regarding actions taking place within a General Tribal Council meeting, that the structure of the tribe is set up such that the General Tribal Council is a legislative body, and legislative questions are best, process questions are best answered by that body, and they dismissed that request from Mr. Delgado regarding a declaratory ruling. It came up again in 2013, Raquel Hill versus the Oneida Business Committee and the General Tribal Council. That was regarding, I believe it was the adoption of the election law and the CIOTS voting. The Appeals Commission heard that request for a declaratory ruling and ultimately dismissed it, indicating again that this is a legislative procedural action best responded to by the body itself. The judiciary law identifies that declaratory rulings can be brought for actions regarding interpreting tribal law. Tribal law is identified as something adopted under the Legislative Procedures Act. It is possible to bring a request for a declaratory ruling, framing this as a procedural, not framing this as a procedural question, but as in regards to whether the action itself is valid in adopting what I've always interpreted as a law. A directive of the General Tribal Council equates to a legislative action. So it is possible to bring a declaratory ruling. I simply caution the Business Committee that it is likely that it will be dismissed. I'm not entirely certain a declaratory ruling is necessary at this point. The General Tribal Council acted at that GTC meeting. They took action. They had the opportunity to question the action. They had the opportunity to challenge and request rulings on whether motions were in order. And those answers were given. The meeting was closed. In the past, our office, myself, I've always indicated that those challenges needed to be raised in the meeting, and that carrying out that directive afterwards was the responsibility of the Business Committee. So in regards to the declaratory ruling, I'm not entirely certain that the judiciary will accept it, although if directed, I will write as strong a request for that declaratory ruling as I can.
Madam Chair.
Lisa?
I make a motion to approve the request to direct the Tribal Treasurer and Chief Counsel to submit for a declaratory ruling request to the United Judiciary by July 15, 2016 regarding the interpretation of the opinion that on June 13, 2016 General Tribal Council's per capita motion amendments had irregularities and need further discussion.
So motion by Lisa to direct the Treasurer and Chief Counsel to submit a request for a declaratory ruling regarding the June 13th GTC per capita meeting. Is there support on the motion? Is there support on the motion? Second call. Is there support on the motion? Third call. There's no support for the motion. The motion fails for lack of support. Discussion on this item. Trish?
Madam Chair, in light of what the Chief Legal Counsel just stated, and the fact that the judiciary would look at interpreting law versus procedure, I don't think there's a need for this. The earlier discussion that we had on this agenda was that your intention is to ask for a legal opinion outside the council, so I'm satisfied with that. I don't know that, to answer the question of procedure, I don't know that an outside counsel will understand our internal rules, but that's besides the point. So that's the only reason that I'm changed my position on this. Originally, I was in support of it to answer the question, to make sure that we were in compliance with GTC direction. And in that vein, there were other motions made to the main motion that explicitly changes the main motion. And so, understanding that we could have addressed it there, I don't know what the time frame is when a challenge to a GTC motion, we had that kind of thing back when we did the $5,000 per capita, I believe it was. There was a challenge by the chairperson at that time, and the business committee approved a resolution calling the motions out of order. We didn't follow that process, and so the declaratory rule, and I believe there's a time frame, I'm not certain, that we have to have that done. Although it was brought in as a question, the statements were also, so I don't know where that leaves us. So until the General Tribal Council makes change, I guess that would be the process that I want to follow. And so rather than trying to declare what a ruling, the ruling was clear, and it's the motion, it's actually the law that's not clear. So with that, that's the reason why I don't want to go for the declaratory ruling.
Because Joanne says most likely they won't hear it? That's the
No,
reason.
because the challenge is that, because the General Tribal Council took the action, General Tribal Council needs to take additional action, in my point, in order for us to make a change. A judiciary ruling or a legal opinion isn't going to make the change of the General Tribal Council action. We would have to go back to General Tribal Council action and take that. Until that point, I would be out of compliance if I don't complete the directions of the General Tribal Council. So with that, I've already started some processes, and the debt payment is already starting to be paid. The budget has, as of yesterday, been finalized. So, I mean, what the number has been balanced. So there's things moving based on General Tribal Council action. And so I don't want to deviate from that at this point or delay at this point because of a question. So the unless the General Tribal Council wants to bring it up and address it, then my charge is to carry out the activities that were presented there. So that's kind of why that's why I'm thinking that there's really no need for this. The question can be asked and answered, but it doesn't make a difference unless the General Tribal Council makes a difference, takes action on it.
Lisa, then David?
Well, I understand what you're saying. However, getting an opinion from outside of the tribe's processes, I don't think is conducive to what we are. You're absolutely right when you stated that an outside attorney isn't necessarily going to understand all the nuances of the dynamics between the legislative, judicial, and the General Tribal Council. And so I guess I'm of the opinion that, this is our opportunity to exercise our sovereignty in a way that is pertinent to what we need to do here in regards to carrying out the directive of the General Tribal Council. It's a question that's being raised. I agree. If the chair has questions, it is unfortunate because the chair that chaired the meeting called it in order. It wasn't challenged, as Chief Counsel's pointing out, and General Tribal Council adopted it. And so whether we agree or disagree with what occurred, I've been on the opposite end over the years of disagreements with General Tribal Council action, but you deal with it and you move on because that's the direction of General Tribal Council. And I've too in the past have challenged when I felt like it wasn't appropriate, but I did it through a process, and that process was the judiciary. At the time, it was the Appeals Commission. So I feel like it's our responsibility to exercise our decisions and our sovereignty in a way that conforms to what we've done from a structural perspective, which is creation of the judiciary. If we're not going to use that system, then why did we go through all that work to do it? And so I guess I'm disappointed in the change of heart.
David?
Joanne, can you kind of give a brief summary of that night, of your recollection of what happened? Because it was voted twice because there was a misconception in the crowd, so I believe the chairwoman did ask for a second vote just to clarify, and she did clarify it. And then the other question I have for you, have you did any research in the past if this same scenario has happened? I'm recalling the one stop over here where they actually had the gaming on there, and the amendment actually superseded the main motion. So I want to know if there's any history in the past, if this ever happened before, and if you could bring that back for the next meeting.
Yes, I have conducted the history, and I have listened to the audio regarding that particular evening. The action that you're referencing is actually two separate motions, so two separate main motions. We do this regularly in regards to adoption of the budget, move to adopt the budget, and then making multiple changes underneath it. We do it in regards to adoption of the agenda. We've done it in regards to adoption of various motions. For example, there was a per capita position, my apologies, a wage increase petition submitted, and there was a motion to approve the petition. There was a second, there was an amendment to that motion that reduced the salary level in the petition and placed additional limitations on the payment of that wage increase, very similar to what we have in front of us today. Robert's Rules of Order says that a main motion brings an action of business before the body. And in order to be germane, in order to be valid, it must be related to the subject matter. The 10-day notice policy says the only subject you can bring before the General Tribal Council is one that's been properly noticed. We've received multiple per capita petitions in the past and rejected the petition but accepted a per capita somewhat less than that by a subsequent motion. Robert's Rules of Order says that any amendment that is related to the subject matter of the main motion is in order. They, in fact, have a specific example where a main motion is offered to commend a member, and an amendment to that motion deletes the word commend and inserts the word censures and identifies that that is an action that is in order. It is germane to the main motion, even though it flips it on its head. The main motion at this meeting was made, motion to adopt the petition. It was explained. There was discussion. An amendment was made to reduce it to 1,300. It was challenged. It was ruled to be in order. It was explained at least 3 times when a vote was taken. And then a subsequent motion was made to reduce it from 5 years to 3. That motion ultimately failed. It was also explained several times before the vote. You yourself made an amendment to the debt payment plan. That was explained, as well as the First Amendment that passed was explained. And that motion passed. There was a privileged question about making additional motions, and they were ruled that we had a main motion and 2 motions on the floor. There was a call for the question. The main motion was explained, including the impact of the 2 amendments that had been made, so that it was 1,300, not 2,000, and the debt payment program would be utilized. And that it was for a 5-year period. They began the vote. There was a question raised about they didn't know what they were voting on. She recalled the election board members, explained the vote and the motion again, and then we conducted the count on the vote. So it was explained multiple times during the meeting. We moved on to the next subject after that was concluded, and then we concluded the meeting shortly thereafter, having run out of time.
And then one more clarification, when Robert's Rules of Order, just the last meeting that we just went through, where actually they make a motion on the floor and then they are able to go back and change it multiple times. Is that acceptable?
It's, in Robert's Rules of Order, no, that is not an acceptable process. It cannot be done. Under the General Tribal Council processes for years, decades, that has been an acceptable process to clarify words within there. There are some limitations, and it's quite fluid in how we do that. Sometimes it's in order, sometimes the determination is we've gone too far down the road to make changes to the wording, or that the wording changes suggest that it changes the nature of the motion itself. So yes, there are a number of examples of that having occurred as before I used 2008 as sort of a pivot period because now we're in the stipend era. Before the stipends and after the stipends, we've done that on a regular, and that's a General Tribal Council action. That's not in Robert's Rules of Order.
Any other questions or comments? Brandon and Kathy?
Yeah, I guess I'm in agreement with, I am in agreement with what the treasurer has stated. Anything absent of another General Tribal Council action, we proceed as we've been told by the governing body. And until that's undone, I think we need to continue on moving forward. And as Chief Counsel has stated, that this was debated well. It was very clear to the General Tribal Council when they made the motion that the amendment did change the intent, or the number, not the intent, but the number of the motion. And it was explained very succinctly, and the General Tribal Council understood that action, and there was many comments reflecting that number as well, in support, hoping for 2,000, but also recognizing that being fiscally responsible, that this was the choice that would be responsible. And so I'm also in that opinion that unless GTC acts instead of the previous action, we continue forward with that motion.
Kathy?
Thank you. This body up here for years has functioned on the misconception of the crowd many, many times. And it's just another screw up. I think when I first initially came up to this mic, my intent was to state that I think the most important thing of all is that there needs to be training for whoever sits in these seats, including yourselves. There needs to be extensive training on the understanding of General Tribal Council, because it's not even understood here completely. There's a lot of disrespect. I've seen and heard a lot of disrespect towards the General Tribal Council, to the General Tribal Council, with the General Tribal Council. I've witnessed that, I've observed it, and that's my belief, that's my opinion. And I think the biggest thing of all is that you all need to start training or cross-training. It reminds me of the workforce within our structure. When somebody takes a vacation or gets sick, nobody knows how to do that job. And I think that's been discussion on this floor for many, many years. And it's the same thing, same exact thing. And there needs to be some kind of a training and understanding of how things are functionable. I have my opinions, you have your opinions, and each one of your opinions are different from each other's, as well as 1,500 people. I was there. It was confusing. Somebody somewheres didn't know how to run the meeting or operate it the way it could have or should have or would have been. I applaud you, Tina, because I think you do a good job. I have thoughts of, I don't understand where some of you come from, because you're texting on your phones and you're on your laptops, and I don't know who's coming out of your mouth, but you're speaking from somewhere else, I think, in a lot of instances. And I think this might be the case with this problem that has come up too. It's unfortunate, but I believe with all my heart that it needs to go back to General Tribal Council. And just, let's try to work together and upfront and open and honest instead of manipulative, because there's a lot of that too, on both sides. That's just my opinion.
Brad?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, GTC directives are GTC directives. The former the Appeals Commission nor judiciary can overrule GTC, period. GTC actions are final. Now, under Robert Rules as a parliamentarian, the chair of the meeting is a third-party person. When the chair places a motion before the assembly, that motion stands. So therefore, we had an amendment to the main motion to approve 1300, which passed. The main motion, which was also placed before the assembly by the chair, also stands. The chair of the meeting, once that motion is placed before the assembly, it is theirs and nobody else's. So GTC voted on 2 of them. So you have to follow GTC directives now. There's a 2000 and a 1300. Under Robert Rules, that's clearly stated. And I'm a parliamentarian. The tribe paid for my training. Ms. House had even stated at one time she didn't want to be parliamentarian. Right, Joanne?
Oh, I've stated it on a number of occasions. It's not really a
But
fun job.
The thing is, as a parliamentarian, I went through all the training, and that's the way it is in Robert Rules. Once the question is placed before the assembly, it is theirs. And however they vote on it, that stands. So if you want to do anything about this, you're going to have a separate meeting just on that again, which will require the 2/3 vote. Are you going to waste the money of GTC again? Take your losses. The chair of the meeting that night should be sanctioned or something for her actions, for not knowing what she was doing and following the rules. It's just that plain and simple. Madam Chair knows what she's doing. She just asked questions before to me as,
Most times.
huh?
Most times I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So, we've communicated. Other chairs have communicated with me too on how to do things. So, as I'm stating, as a parliamentarian, I'll stand and argue before you. The motion was placed before the assembly, and under Robert Rules, which have stated, which we run under. And when it comes to amendments to a motion, there can be as many amendments as we'd like. There is no limitation. I want that clarified also. When you're running under Robert Rules, we want to make 10, 20, 30 amendments to a motion, we can do it. But there cannot be more than 2 at a time. So as stated, whatever happened with these 2 motions, they were legally placed by the chair of the meeting before the assembly. The assembly voted on them. They stand. Thank you.
I guess my only last issue, not for you, Brad, but I guess my last concern is an amendment doesn't carry unless the main motion carries. And the main motion was to adopt a $2,000 payment for 5 years. That carried, positive in and of itself. Amendments go with the main motion. And the amendment provided for $13,000. And it said instead, but whether it said instead or not, it contradicted the main motion. An amendment cannot go forward unless the main motion goes forward. If the main motion fails, all the amendments go away. So you can't have an amendment without a main motion. The main motion passed in an affirmative. Right here it says there was 1,068 in support of the motion to adopt a $2,000 per capita payment, 200 opposed, 35 abstained. And so that's the fundamental issue here. So they both pass, so they both get paid? Or one goes away, or they both go away? It's not clear. And I listened to the tape. I listened to excerpts of the tape. There was confusion. People were asking, what are we voting on? And they were told, they were ignored, they were shut down, they were told, you can't ask. In different excerpts, there was questions of clarity being asked. Specifically, Mary Ann said, what are we voting on? And She was told, we're voting, we can't discuss, whatever. But we weren't voting at that point in time. It could have been answered. I listened to it 3 times, that excerpt. So there was confusion, there was not clarity, and there were procedural irregularities in the sense that the amendment was not called out of order. 2 distinct issues. You can't do one that trumps the other. An amendment cannot trump a main motion, and that's the issue. Nor can an amendment go forward unless the main motion passes in the affirmative. It passed in the affirmative, allowing for $2,000. That is the issue here.
Madam Chair?
Did you have something to say, George?
Yeah, I said, and then it was amended, so the main motion
No.
passes, and then the amendment corrects it. So in that case, and because it says instead of, had it said something different, but the motion specifically says instead of the 2,000, and then it was later clarified about it being the business committee's plan. So I understand what you're trying to say, but I have to just disagree with it. That's part of what I'm trying to say is that we've already initiated, based on this action, next steps. Next steps was pay the debt, finish finalizing the budget, and we've done that. And it was with the understanding, regardless of whether there was an irregularity that happened, it's with the understanding by the General Tribal Council at that meeting, because it was clarified time and time and time again, each time that we came to that particular amendment, I believe 3 different occasions, so that amendment was clarified, and the General Tribal Council were explicitly aware of the amount that they were voting on. So regardless of the main motion passing and the second motion coming, it was the understanding, and it was very clear and concise that the amount was to be $1,300. I went forward and created the budget based on that. If we stop that now, we won't have a budget. That's one thing. Also, there's got to be a process to change it, to assume that there was something done wrong based on how we do things. We change things, and it's always up to the chair to determine which direction they're gonna facilitate that meeting in. Joanna stated it over and over and over again. It's up to the chair. So it doesn't mean it means the person who's chairing the meeting. It was her interpretation that the amendment changed the main motion, and she stated it over and over and over again. And I really don't think that there's need to continue with this discussion. I'm going to make a motion to withdraw this request from the agenda.
Second.
Madam Chair?
1 second, please. There is a motion to withdraw this item from the agenda by Trish, and there's a second by Lisa. Discussion? Brett?
For your information, Trish, the main motion stands as is. There was questions asked, and you did not listen. Do we not have to change that main motion to 1,300? That was asked. The chair said no. It's
No, she
taken
didn't.
care of. Don't sit and shake your head no. I was at that meeting. I was listening. The main motion was placed before the assembly at 2,000, not at 1,300. There was questions asked at least 3-4 times. Do we not have to change that amount? And the chair of the meeting kept saying, no, it's taken care of. So that 2,000 was placed as the main motion. That passed. The amendment fails because the main motion was stated at 2,000. It was asked to change the main motion. It wasn't changed. So therefore, as I had stated, under Robert Rules of Order, which we run under, the main motion was placed by the chair before the assembly, which was under their control. They asked the question. The chair did not change it, nor anybody else changed it. Therefore, that stands. Thank you.
Lisa?
Call for the question.
Let's call for a question regarding the motion by Trish, seconded by Lisa, to withdraw this item from the agenda All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Kathy?
At the last BC meeting, I was discussing some things where I named the title. I didn't use anybody's name, but somebody got upset out in the audience and said, no one should say names, and no one should say titles, and no one should talk about anybody when they're not here. Well, you know, the vice chair is not here, and I think that discussion needs to come up with the vice chair being present. And those 1,000 and plus people could be included in that, too.
Okay,
Madam Chair, can we move on?
we are going to move on. I think the issue is not resolved. We'll move on to the agenda. I will bring back something formally to the agenda, and we do still have the table item outstanding.